Hi there, and welcome to this conversation that I'm having with Duncan Reyburn uh, on the topic of desire. I think it's a very important subject for us to talk about. So, firstly, Duncan, how are you doing? You're up in Joburg now, right?
I am from Pretoria. I'm in
Pretoria.
Pretoria.
Oh,
So
Pretoria.
in the
Oh,
you're sitting in my office at the University of Pretoria, and it's a lovely day, not too hot.
that's great. Uh, I live down in Cape Town, and for us, Johannesburg and Pretoria are kind of like one place. So,
They're the same thing. They're actually the vibe difference between Johannesburg and Pretoria is significant. Johannesburg
yeah,
is full of much angrier drivers, I think.
that's brilliant. Okay, well, let's get started. So, we're obviously going to talk about desire, although you're going to be doing most of the talking, and I'm going to be probing you with a few questions. And I thought we could start off just by talking about why is it important for us to even think about this topic. So, maybe you could just start off with some of your thoughts on why desire, why this topic.
Yeah, it's a good question because I think it's very easy to think that this is very abstract and completely detached from what it means to be alive. But desire is literally the driving force that keeps us going. It's what directs our entire lives. It's what shapes, just our normal interactions with people, but it shapes politics, it shapes geopolitics, it shapes the economy. The way economics works is largely, I mean, you could almost see the stock exchange as a kind of domain of desire. So desire is entangled in every single human action, and for that reason, it's pretty worthwhile understanding what it's about.
So, would you then say that every minute of every day for every single person in the Cape, in Pretoria, in London, in Sydney, every single person they're just sort of acting on desires all the time. Would
Yeah,
I
so
go
I
so
think
far as to say that?
it's a fairly extreme statement, but in a way, you can say it's true as long as you keep in mind that many of our desires are unconscious, so we're not fully aware of them. Um, I am at one point in my life, I made a decision. I wanted to be in academia, and so now I am acting according to that desire that was implanted in me somehow ages ago. So it is safe to say that desire is infused in every single one of our actions in one way or another, whether fully consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah. So either it's that conscious desire, that conscious want. So maybe then you could elaborate on like what at a fundamental level, what is a desire at its most sort of basic level?
Yeah, so it's that's actually one of the hardest things to define because usually I think we think of desire as more in terms of what it does than what it is. But you can get a fairly good clue from a number of philosophers. I'm going to start by saying I think it's really that if anyone wants to really grapple with the idea of desire and how it shapes our lives, it's very important to look at the work of Rene Girard, Girard. But I'm going to start with Plato. Plato's got this idea that desire is this fundamental drive towards the good and the true and the beautiful, towards unity, a unified existence. Whereas you've got someone a little bit earthier, Aristotle, he says that desire is the faculty of the soul that motivates action. And then, of course, you get Nietzsche, who's got this idea that desire is an aspect of the will to power, which is this creative self-transforming energy that we have. But I think generally it's very helpful to understand desire as a motivating force. It's something that directs us towards an object or some aim or some outcome. As I said, it can be intentional. It can be intentional and conscious, or it can be unconscious. But something that, and this is where I'll get to Gerard, something that Gerard points out, which I think is really, really important, and it's not how we usually think of desire, is he says desire is not a merely subjective or individualistic drive. It is a social,
Mm,
it's a social phenomenon,
mm,
meaning that our desires are mediated and often even just directly copied from other people.
mm,
And that has huge implications. One of them being that desire is shaped by peer pressure, and this is not just for teenagers; it's for grown-ups
mm.
too. So yeah, that I hope that helps to
Yes.
clarify something of what desire is.
No, no, I think it does. It's just, and the word that came to mind when you were talking about Plato and Aristotle, Gerard, and then was it Nietzsche you quoted there?
Nietzsche, yeah.
And I literally thought of like force or energy as you were talking about it, and then you mentioned it at the end. It does seem to be this sort of internal drive, this internal force energy towards a particular outcome. But what you point out there is that this, even though it is internal, that the internal is coming from the outside. So it's it sort of comes in from the outside and then it comes out and then it comes from the outside and it comes out. It's kind of this two-way thing, outside, inside, inside, outside, almost.
Yeah, I
It's
think desire almost has, I mean, to use another philosopher, but d desire almost has a dialectical nature. It's always in dialogue
yes,
with between the self and the other, and of course the world beyond both.
yes.
Yeah,
No,
so it's very malleable and shapeable, but at the same time, it's what shapes us.
yes. I've been I don't know if you've watched that movie. It's quite old. It's the one on about Shaka Zulu by Henry Taylor. Have you ever watched
I,
that one?
I think I saw that when I was like, it is really old. I
It's
don't
old.
even remember it. Yeah.
It's an amazing movie for so many reasons. You should go to watch it now just from like for there's so many things that you'll pick up. But the one thing I did see there is that as Shaka, I mean, obviously it doesn't cover history perfectly, but I think it is trying to, as best as possible, do that. But what you do see happen is that as Shaka starts to sort of get his war machine going, people buy into this. And there's sort of this group thing that happens where people start to desire that expansion of the Zulu kingdom. And then Shaka goes further and further afield and sort of will go to a certain tribe and say, "Either join us or we kill you." But there's almost, but you can see desire at work there, and people pick it up and they just go, fighting. But it's there is this community aspect to the desire which fuels it, which you can see quite clearly.
What's amazing, every story will be driven by desire. So every narrative, whether in history or in a movie, is going to be motivated by a desire. One of the interesting ways of conceiving of desire is as a kind of contagion, which I think you see very much in sort of a mob or a tribe or any form of sort of warlike action. It's very much a contagion. Everyone has to buy into it to be able to act with some form of integrity, whether it is, I use the word integrity more in the, I suppose, architectural sense than in the ethical sense. I think things need to hold together. They have to
Yes.
be attached to desire in some way. So it's a good image.
Yeah, which is, I think I'm going down a rabbit hole now. We can keep on going with our questions, but I think fundamentally that's why South Africa is an inconsistent country because it's a landmass filled with different nations, and each nation has its own desire, and so you see this constant conflict going on that will I don't think in the current framework will be resolved. Uh, forcing everyone together into this one identity, I don't think will because there are these competing desires. Um, yeah, as I was thinking about it, that jumped to mind.
Yeah, so to deal with that, because I think it's so timely and so important. I think a lot of the arguments that break out on social media actually have to do with a felt sense that we do not know what we want.
Yeah,
And we need
exactly.
others to actually tell us what to want. And this is true of everyone in some way or another, although some of us are maybe a little bit better at holding on to the desires that we catch onto as we live. And so what the fights are about, at least in part, is this trying to figure out like what should we want together, and of course, then bearing in mind this idea that South Africa includes these various nations, what are we supposed to even want as a segment of this larger
Yep.
framework?
No, it's
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
it's a fascinating thing, and it's especially if you think about South Africa, the last sort of 10 years, where I mean, we've probably got what well over 5 million Shona people, and so I was thinking about them, and I was thinking about the increase in Chinese people, and they've got a particular desire. So I think that it's proliferated even more since 94.
yeah, but this and what is I think very important is to notice that this is happening at a global level
Yeah.
thanks to just the phenomenon of the internet. So you have people from various cultures with various, I would say, each culture has its own network of desires.
Yeah.
Now there's sort of there's this phenomenon on the internet called context collapse, which I really like the idea. It's helpful. It's where a message intended for one audience ends up in another audience in their domain. And so that creates enormous confusion. It creates a lot of, I suppose, ratioing, if you use the social media term. So there's this uncertainty that is very, very much a global phenomenon. But then it's definitely happened in South Africa specifically, where we see uh, a kind of emergence of a multipolarity, a kind of hyper
Yes.
multipolarity that's politically being shaped by these conflicting desires.
Yeah, and when you view that from desire, it actually explains a lot. It helps you to understand why things are, as you say, there is this instability. It's a fascinating thing. Um, so I just want to examine desires a little bit further, because the question arises, and you mentioned morality or ethics, is are there some good desires? Are there some bad desires? How do we determine which desire is good, which is bad? Are all desires good or all desires bad? What are your thoughts around sort of examining the ethics of desires?
Yeah, so it links to the fact that desire is intrinsically a self-other relation. So there is already just by desiring, we are situated in relation to others. And that's of course what ethics always deals with. I think there is maybe there are two ways of understanding ethics. The one is that there is a kind of intrinsic or fundamental ethos, which I would refer to Thomas Aquinas, who refers to being as such is good. It's good that there is existence, that there is life, that there is what is, which is kind of like the foundation of reality. We exist as beings before we exist as doings.
Mm.
And then I would say there's a second level, which is the kind of constructed ethos. And ultimately, desire, I think, in its very nature, is upward directed. So
Mm.
it's directed towards what is the highest good, what is the highest form of truth or the highest form of beauty.
Mm.
And I think the minute you move towards the higher
Mm.
values, you can start to find a place for any subordinate value, like, for instance, consumerism, which is I would say on the whole a terrible thing in itself.
Mm.
If you go and purchase something that's not necessarily unethical, but it only becomes truly ethical when it is set up in relation to what is the highest good, what helps to sustain good, healthy relationships, what helps to cut violence out, that sort of thing.
Mm.
So desire and ethics are always entangled, and I think examining which desires are good or bad, probably you need a bigger sense of what this
The
ethical
highest good.
domain is about. What is the highest good? How can harmony be achieved between different kinds of people,
Yes.
different cultures, etc.?
No, sure. Yeah. Because I was thinking about the desire for what someone else has. So, for instance, I'm living somewhere and my neighbor suddenly buys a new car. Where does my desire go there? Does my desire go of, wow, that's an awesome car. I'm going to work hard to try get my own? Or do I think, ooh, that's a
Yeah.
nice car. Maybe I could steal it. You know, like I'm now thinking in a real practical way. And yeah, and I suppose
So,
it really does depend on what I understand is the highest desire will determine whether I steal it or whether I go and try to buy my own.
so it's very important to realize when you realize that desire is borrowed or copied. Why do you want your neighbor's car? It's not because of the car, it's because of your neighbor. So Gerard would say that all desire.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. No, it's so true. It's because my neighbor has it. Yeah.
Yeah, so all desire is at root metaphysical desire. It is the desire for being. And so all of us, just at an intrinsic human level, feel that we are insufficient. We are
Sure.
lacking in something. And so I mean, part of that is a good thing, I think, which is we realize that we cannot make it through life on our own. We are vulnerable. We need people to help us to meet our needs. So there is a kind of foundational sense of lack. But certain people are very easy to copy because they seem to have more being. They have more existence than we do. And that's usually where that's that thing that you were describing, that's where envy comes in. So we look at our neighbor and we go, wow, this guy's got it all. He's got the big house, he's got the fancy car. And then it's the in that moment of looking at all of these lovely things, say the objects of our desire, we actually have created some confusion. We've mistaken one desire for another. The desire is for more being, more existence, more sort of abundance. So that would tie into Nietzsche's idea of the will to power. But that desire for abundant life has been read as meaning if I get this object that I want, the new car, say, in your example, I will then have more being. And of course, this leads to something that everyone is familiar with, which is buyer's remorse, because you get the new thing or you leave I mean, immigration is a
Yeah.
great example. This you go to where there are greener pastures and you still lack that the being that you wanted. You actually realize, oh, but I'm still me, even though I now have a BMW, whereas
Yeah.
I didn't have it before. So it's the practical stuff is where it gets really interesting, where we
No.
realize the degree to which we copy each other.
No, sure. And I suppose there we need to firstly accept and realize that abundance is not going to be found in copying people for material things.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I mean, it's very helpful to realize that we've been trained, most of us, into thinking like moderns, and moderns essentially forget the verticality of desire. They forget that desires can be for God or for higher values or for a better way of living. And modernity trains us to think about, which is, I mean, we're, I suppose, in the aftermath of it or at the tail end of modernity, we start to want very imminent, very immediate things. So we basically lose touch with what is the big picture, what is life supposed to be about.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about this one talk that I heard. I don't know if it's true, but he was talking about the word humility, and he said um, that humility can be traced back to this verse in the Bible, apparently, where the Apostle Paul speaks about he speaks about Jesus giving up his power and authority and becoming as a servant. And he was saying that humility as a virtue, perhaps it's not so much a virtue now, but he was saying there have been times in history in certain groups of people where humility has been a virtue. And he was studying this, and he basically went all the way back to Apostle Paul was one of the first times that he could find humility being a virtue. So I suppose, if we had to go back to things like actually humility is a better thing to desire than a new car. And because anyone can be humbled, you don't need to have money. You just have to give up whatever to serve others. Maybe that's a path through.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. The chapter is Philippians 2, where it talks about the Jesus not regarding equality with God as a thing to be grasped, but taking on the form of a servant. He denied his own nature in a sense. There's this theological idea of called kenosis, which is links to humility. It's this idea of self-emptying. And Jesus is a profound example of perfect humility in that he does not even, in a sense, he does not even have his own identity. He keeps on saying, it's not my will that's the most important, it's the Father's will. There's this, there's this willingness to deny self for the sake of others. And I mean, ultimately, theologically speaking, for the sake of everybody who's ever lived. So humility is I think what it teaches us in terms of desire is to recognize our actual state. So it recognizes the truth of where we stand, which is you are humble the moment you realize I cannot do something on my own. I cannot achieve something on my own. I need assistance even. I mean, to practically speaking, call the cops or call security or that idea of recognizing when you're in trouble, maybe someone else needs to step in and help you out.
No, sure. No, that's great. And I think moving, you mentioned about the tail end of the modern period or postmodern, however we want to see it. Maybe the way forward for us is to go back and to desire those sort of ancient values, um, humility being one. Just to end off our conversation, because I just see the time and I know you are quite busy. Um, yeah, I wanted to talk about, and I mean, we've kind of sort of gone on to this, but how could our desires lead us to God? I mean, I suppose we have been speaking about it already, but I think that it's important for us to, as it would bring God back into the conversation because, because of the work of the new atheists that period, 2000s to 2010 and 10, and maybe from like 1990 to 2010, God was sort of pushed out of the picture. But from what I can see online and in conversation, it seems like God is sort of coming back into the picture. So, yeah, I just would love you to speak about desire and God and how our desires, and, is God that highest desire you were talking about? And just to sort of talk into that, because I know you're a Catholic, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, I mean, as soon as you get into the more transcendent stuff, you start to immediately run out of the right words to say. But what I think is helpful to start with is just if our society conditions our desire, we need to recognize that our desires tend to be shaped by various social pressures. And over the last, I mean, you can really go back to the Enlightenment as the sort of main pressure point that starts to squeeze everything into this immanent frame where we start to be more concerned with material things or with things that are intellectually rationalizable and solvable. You start to realize that, in a way, Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris, I guess, those are the terrible three, and then Daniel Dennett, the terrible four, the four men of the apocalypse, the horsemen. They were basically at the tail end of an
Yeah,
enlightened
no, that's
tradition.
true.
And what starts to happen, I mean, if you take atheism really seriously, what you end up with is all values, all things that are of value are arbitrary. It doesn't have an intrinsic worth that is imparted to it by God. And nihilism is ultimately not something anyone could could live with if they really look at it. I mean, I think very few nihilists realize what they're doing is they're using values that they were given to devalue something, to devalue life and creation. And so I think what we're seeing is this recognition largely. I mean, to speak in very broad strokes, we're seeing this recognition that to let our desires stop at only what is most immediately apparent is to deny our nature and to deny the nature of what we encounter. I mean, if anyone goes and stands on the Drakensberg and just really takes it in, it starts to become apparent that you cannot say this is meaningless. There is some intrinsic value that is felt by us. So we feel it, and it helps to then recognize that the ultimate affirmation of the created order comes from the affirmation of the God who made it. And so when we desire God, we desire according to God, as we would say according to each other. But it's to really, I think, humbly accept that if we want the fullness of life or wholeness or the fullest truth, we need to affirm that which is the highest truth and the highest good. So
So,
desire, I think, naturally leads us there, but sometimes we put little like roadblocks on it unnecessarily.
so instead of us echoing the desires of our peers, we, in a sense, echo the desires of God, you would say.
Yeah, that's what I would say. And of course, that has the often unfortunate consequence of angering the mob. As Jesus says, prophets were killed. Jesus himself was crucified. Many of his followers were annihilated. And I think it's because it's uncomfortable. I mean, this is a complicated subject on its own. It's uncomfortable for people to submit to something that is mysterious. I mean, God is ultimately
Hmm,
the name of mystery, the
sure.
most perfect mystery.
No, sure.
So
No, well, thank you. It's a great sort of starter, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. So thanks so much, Duncan. I really appreciate that, and I hope that those listening can take something away from this and for us all to think more about this topic.
thank you so much for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Right. Well, I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you, you too, man.
Okay. Bye.